Hello, my name is Nicholas Jordan G. Ganpangkol, and today I'll be discussing our primary sources to identify any biases, limitations, or contradictions, as well as how it contributes to our understanding of the West Philippine Sea situation. For our first primary source, bias may come from the Philippines' interest in asserting its EEZ, compared to China, who has rejected participation entirely. And how it contributes to our understanding of the West Philippine Sea, it shows the Philippines' reliance on international legal mechanisms and peaceful resolution. For our second primary source, the narrative mainly reflects the Philippines' perspective. China's version of events is not equally presented. And how it helps in our understanding is that it highlights the flashpoints that escalated tensions and led to the loss of effective control. For our third primary source, the limited Chinese transparency, Philippines' access to the full details is restricted. And as for our understanding of the West Philippine Sea, it demonstrates how China slowly gained its presence through salami slicing tactics. For our fourth primary source, based on China's historical narrative, not aligned with UNCLOS, it is rejected internationally. And as for how it contributes to our understanding of the West Philippine Sea, it emphasizes legal, geographic basis for the Philippines' challenge to the China's claim. And for our last primary source, our fifth source, nationalistic tone, it downplays internal inconsistencies in different administrations, and for how it contributes to our understanding of the West Philippine Sea, it provides insight into evolving official policy and political will to assert territorial rights. That is all, and we will be having Mr. Polanco.
Hi, I'm Justin Ong Polanco. Together with Sam Nicole, we're gonna discuss the Philippine government's official stand against West Philippine Sea. Our primary sources states that although the disputes date back to the 1940s, tensions escalated in the mid-1990s due to Chinese increased assertiveness, especially after the Panganiban Reef incident. The West Philippine Sea dispute, primarily between the Philippines and China, stems from overlapping territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea, particularly the Spratly Islands. China's claim is based on the 9-dash line, a demarcation that lacks legal basis under international law. On 22nd January 2013, the Philippines initiated arbitral proceedings against China to challenge their respective maritime entitlements and question the legality of the China's activities in the South China Sea. In response, through a diplomatic note dated 19th of February 2013, China formally rejected the arbitration process. Sam Nicole, we're gonna discuss this Scarborough Shoal.
Hi guys, it's me, Sam Nicole Tiherdia, and today I'll be talking to you about something that might sound simple at first, which is called a shoal. So it is the shallow part of the sea, but what if I tell you that this shallow area is causing deep tensions between two countries like China and the Philippines? So to start off, the Scarborough Shoal, or what we proudly call as the Bajo de Mansilok, it is a group of rocks and reefs sitting quietly in the West Philippine Sea. 120 nautical miles off Luzon, it may seem just like an ocean in stones, but it holds something far more valuable, like three things. First is the marine life, second is the rich fishing grounds, and lastly is the possible oil and gas. Let's start with something called as the 9-dash line. It is a U-shaped line that China uses to claim almost the entire South China Sea, including areas way closer to the Philippines, Vietnam, and other neighboring countries. And originally, this has 11 dashes, then later reduced to 9, but here is the problem. The line overlaps with the exclusive economic zones, which is called EEZs for short, of other countries, meaning China is claiming areas that legally belong to others. Then this took a serious turn in the year 2012. What started as a typical fishing patrol turned into a standoff between Philippines and Chinese vessels over who has the right to be there. Since then, China hasn't backed off, and this tiny shoal remained a big issue. So another is the Mischief Reef incident in 1995, where China started building on a reef inside our EEZ. They said this was just for fishermen, but over time it became a military outpost, raising a lot of red flags. But here's the catch. China ignored the ruling and continued its activities. Now, this is where the Mutual Defense Treaty with the US comes in. This was signed in 1951, basically says if one of us is attacked, we defend each other. So even though we're a smaller country, we're not standing alone. With the treaty, we have backing of a powerful ally, a big help in protecting our territory. So to wrap everything up, first, the 9-dash line is a China's claim, but it's not legal. Next is Mischief Reef, shows us how real the threat is. The next, the Hague ruling supported us. And the Mutual Defense Treaty gives us protection and strength.
Hello, I'm Sam Bakaso, your news anchor. I'm with Kwano. Today, we're gonna discuss about secondary sources. Let's start. So, in secondary sources and other news, a former Philippine senator has strongly condemned what he described as China's aggressive and irresponsible actions in the West Philippine Sea. Former Senator Kiko Pangilinan released a statement on Wednesday denouncing the latest reported harassment by Chinese vessels against Philippine ships in Bajo de Masinloc, an area well within the country's exclusive economic zone. According to Pangilinan, the recent incident endangered the lives of Filipino personnel from the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources and the Philippine Coast Guard. He even stated that sa agresibo at irresponsableng pagkilos na ito ng China, nalagay sa alanganin ang buhay ng ating mga tauhan. Ayon nito, walang karapatan ang China na gawin ito dahil ito'y karagatang saklaw ng Pilipinas. The former senator who is seeking a Senate comeback in the 2025 national election is calling on the Philippine government to file a diplomatic protest. He emphasized that the incident occurred within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone as recognized by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This latest maritime confrontation adds to growing tension between the Philippines and China over disputed territories in the West Philippine Sea.
Philippine Defense Chief calls China's claim in the South China Sea the biggest fiction lie. The Philippines Defense Chief on Monday called China's expansive claims in the South China Sea the biggest fiction lie that no Southeast Asian country would accept, and said that Chinese President Xi Jinping's aggressive policies have undermined international goodwill fostered by his predecessors. Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro fired off his latest tirade against China's increasingly assertive actions in the region on the same day that the Philippine Coast Guard separately reported new incidents involving Chinese forces in the Scarborough Shoal, a hotly disputed fishing atoll in the disputed waterway.
Source number 3. The West Philippine Sea, the territorial and maritime jurisdiction dispute from a Filipino perspective. It is comprehensive, premier authored by Elaine Rivera and J. Batambacal, published in 2013 by the University of the Philippines, Asian Center, and the Institute of Maritime Affairs and Laws of the Sea. This premiere offers an accessible and neutral overview of the territorial and maritime dispute in the West Philippine Sea, focusing on the Philippine perspective. It aims to provide students, researchers, and media professionals, and the general public with a clear understanding of historical context, current conditions, and key issues surrounding the dispute. The content is framed from a Filipino perspective, focusing on information deemed most important and of interest to the citizens of the Philippines. Importantly, the Premier does not advocate for any particular position and policy recommendation, maintaining an objective stance throughout.
So we take a closer look at how different narratives shape the way Filipinos understand the West Philippine Sea, dispute a conflict that remains at the heart of our national security and foreign relationships. So let's begin with a recent report quoting a senatorial candidate Kiko Pangilinan. In it, Pangilinan calls China action in the West Philippine Sea aggressive and irresponsible. This language that transformed the issue into a moral conflict, one that framed the Filipino as defending responsible severity against a powerful aggressor. However, the report presents only Pangilinan's viewpoint and uses emotionally charged language. This highlights a bias that could shape public opinion by portraying China's solidarity as the enemy and limiting space for diplomatic loss. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Gilberto Del Toro has also made headlines describing the opposing side's claims as, quote, the biggest fiction and lie. His strongly worded remarks place the spotlight on the military dimension of the conflict, emphasizing the need for national defense and security. Yet, critics says that this kind of hyperbolic and militaristic tone might overshadow diplomatic solution, pushing a more combative stance. Finally, a legal and historical primer offers a more structured take. It outlines the Philippines' position using constitutional, historical, and international law. It aims to be neutral, but it's clearly framed from a Filipino's perspective. While this reinforces our rightful claims, this may also influence the selective of facts to support national interests, raising questions about balance in presentation.
The territorial dispute in the West Philippine Sea remains a major threat to the peace and security of both the Philippines and the broader Indo-Pacific region. Despite the rise of other global concerns like the COVID-19 pandemic, tensions continue to escalate, prompting the Philippine government to adopt various foreign policy strategies to safeguard national interests. This research analyzes and compares the foreign policy approaches of the Aquino, Duterte, and Marcos Jr. administrations. It evaluates their consistency and coherence using theories from international relations and public policy. Data sources include academic literature, interviews with diplomats, and official presidential statements. The study emphasizes that due to the Philippines' 6-year presidential term and changing global conditions, the country needs a stable and unified foreign policy that can endure beyond individual administrations. Since war is not an option, diplomacy must remain the primary tool in holding disputes. Under the Constitution, the President is chief architect of foreign policy, with the Department of Foreign Affairs serving as a lead agency in its implementation. This research paper is a secondary source as it analyzes the foreign policy strategies of the Aquino, Duterte, and Marcos Jr. administrations. Regarding the West Philippine Sea, it interprets primary documents such as presidential statements, constitutional provisions, and interviews. Through the lens of international relations and public policy, theories to evaluate the coherence of Philippine foreign policy. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has placed the security of the West Philippine Sea at the core of his administrations. Foreign and security policy. Even before taking office, he affirmed his commitment to uphold the 2016 Arbitral Award, which invalidated China's sweeping claims in the South China Sea. To strengthen the Philippine sovereignty, Marcos Jr. is expanding the country's strategic partnerships and recalibrating national policies. However, concerns remain about the long-term sustainability of this strategy, especially with a possible Sara Duterte presidency in 2028, which will shift priorities, a potential Trump victory in the 2024 U.S. elections, which might impact U.S.-Philippine relations. China continues its expansionist and militarist activities, deploying its Navy, Coast Guard, and maritime militia. while building artificial islands in the defense of international law, particularly UNCLOS, UNCLOS, in the West Philippine Sea. China has adopted a de facto exclusion policy, including the harassment and blocking of Philippine vessels and recently water cannon attacks on Filipino boats. These facts serve as a secondary source because it offers analysis of President Marcos' foreign policy approach in the West Philippine Sea. It examines the potential geopolitical impacts of leadership changes in both Philippines and the U.S. critiques China's continued maritime aggression through a policy and strategic lens.
It relies heavily on the interviews and official statements, which may mask behind-the-scenes realpolitik compromises that never entered the public records. Casts lights onto the institutional and bureaucratic challenges. It reminds us that the dispute isn't won or lose in Manila. The analysis of future scenarios 2028 election outcomes is speculative and based on current political figures and trends, which are subject to change. Focuses heavily on the Philippines' internal political dynamics influencing foreign policies. By warning of future political shifts in both Manila and Washington, it shows how integral to Manila's ability to enforce its right in the WPS.
Source number 3. The West Philippine Sea, the territorial and maritime jurisdiction dispute from a Filipino perspective. It is comprehensive, premier authored by Elaine Rivera and J. Batambacal, published in 2013 by the University of the Philippines, Asian Center, and the Institute of Maritime Affairs and Laws of the Sea. This premiere offers an accessible and neutral overview of the territorial and maritime dispute in the West Philippine Sea, focusing on the Philippine perspective. It aims to provide students, researchers, and media professionals, and the general public with a clear understanding of historical context, current conditions, and key issues surrounding the dispute. The content is framed from a Filipino perspective, focusing on information deemed most important and of interest to the citizens of the Philippines. Importantly, the premiere does not advocate for any particular position and policies recommendation, maintaining an objective stance throughout. Trivia number 2. Did you also know that the waters of the West Philippine Sea are home to over 2,500 marine species, including endangered turtles, giant clams, and colorful coral reefs, making it one of the most biodiverse marine areas in the world?